Today, I'm going to present a mini lecture to continue what we talk about list. So basically, a list is a sequence of objects. It doesn't have to be just the numbers. It can be a list of strings, for examples. Now, there are many things that we can do on list. For example, as I mentioned earlier, we can find the number of elements in the list using the function length, and we can retrieve elements in the list using index. So index provides a numbering system to find the position of an element in a list. So the index starts with 0. So this will be the number element 1. The element 1 will be at index 0. Element 2 will be at index 1, and element 3 will be at index 2, and so on. Now we're going to look at examples. So the first example where I want to store a student's name as a list. Okay, instead of storing students' names, I identify students using initials. So initials is defined as the first 2 characters of your first name plus or concatenate with the first 2 characters of your last names. Okay, and I store this into a list called class list. And if I want to find the number of students in my class, I will use the function length on class list to find number of students. So here it says that the number of students in the class is 86. Now, for each of the corresponding students, there will be a score for its quiz, for the quiz 1. Okay, so for example, these students with the initial LIBA will have quiz 1 score 3, and these students with the initial MABE will have the score of quiz 1, which is 2, and so on. Now, if I want to know or to retrieve a quiz 1 score for a particular student, all I have to do is to find out the index of the students in the list class list. Okay, so for example, the student has initials MACA. Okay, so I need to look for the index of these students in my class list using dot index, which is a method, apply on class list. Okay, with the input initial, which is defined to be MACA. Okay, so I store it into a variable called index, and I print the index, which is 6, which means the student with the initial MACA would be at index 6 of class list. Okay, so knowing that this student has index 6 in the class list, I can retrieve the score of quiz of these students, okay, using this index. For example, so quiz 1, the score of quiz 1 of this student will be at quiz 1 with a square bracket 6, which means I'm retrieving the score of quiz 1 at index 6. And index 6 corresponds to the student with the initial MACA. So here the students get score 5. Okay, just another example. Say I have, say I'm just looking at, for example, the student with this initial here. Okay, with the initial ADDO. Okay, first, I need to know the position or the index of these students in my class list. So I do class list. This is where I want to find the index of these students. Okay, dot index on the student's initial, which I initialize to ADDO. Okay, and I run this code. It turns out the students with initial ADDO is at index 16. Okay, so if I want to know the student's score, I will do quiz 1, 16. Okay, so this will give me that the students with the initial ADDO, which is at index 16, actually has score 5 for quiz 1. Okay, so if you want to find out your score or your index in the class, you just replace this by your own index, by your own initials, which I define it to be the first 2 characters of your first name plus the first 2 characters of your last name. All right, and notice that the first character of your first name is capital letter, and the first character of your last name is also capital characters. And Python is very sensitive. Okay, so for example, if I'm looking for class list, if I'm looking for the index of the students MACA, notice that this M here is small and this C here is small letter. If I'm looking for this initial here in class list, I will get an index error or value error because MACA, this initial here is not in the list because Python is case sensitive. The first character of your first name is capital. The first character of your last name should be capital as well. Okay, so Python is case sensitive. All right. Now, what else can we do with a list here? So we have our quiz 1 score here. And if I want to know some statistic of this quiz 1, for example, if I want to find out the maximum score among all students. Okay, so again, just like before, I'm going to use the function max. Okay, so I can say max of quiz 1, and I get 5, which means the maximum score attained by student is 5. Okay, so I can print it out in a more meaningful message. Print maximum score among all students is max quiz 1 is 5. Okay, now how about if I want to find, say, the minimum quiz 1 score among all students? Okay, so I will do print minimum score among all students is, now instead of max, now I'm going to use mint quiz 1. Okay, so it means there is one student that actually gets 0. All right. What's next? Say I can, for example, find the average score of quiz 1. Okay. So the average score of quiz 1 is, okay, so by average, again, as previously mentioned, is the sum of all the scores in quiz 1 divided by the number of students. So the sum, so average score is the sum of all scores, all student scores, divided by the number of students. Okay, so which is sum of quiz 1 divided by number of students, which is length of quiz 1 or length of class list. They have the same number of elements. Okay, so we have on average, the score of quiz 1 is 1.9, for example. Now, this is just a toy example. We have not graded your quiz 1 yet. Okay, now what else can we do? For example, I want to know count. For example, I want to count the number of students with score equals to 5. Okay. All right. So this is something that we can do using built-in method called, so use dot count. Okay. So if you don't know how to use dot count, for example, again, we can use help and you type string dot count. Okay. So this will tell you that it returns the number of non-overlapping occurrence of substring or on this. Okay. For example, actually, sorry, not string.count, list.count. Return the number of occurrence of a certain value. Okay. So for example, if I want to count the number of students with score of quiz 1 equals to 5. So what do I do is that I apply dot count on quiz 1. Okay, and what I want to count is the element 5 in quiz 1. So quiz 1 dot count with the value 5, it returns 5. What does it mean is that there are 5 students with score of quiz 1 equals to 5. Okay, so I can print out a meaningful message here. So print the number of students with score equals to 5 is quiz 1 dot count 5. Okay, similarly, if I want to count the number of students with score of quiz 1 equals to 0, all right, again the same thing, and copy and paste this code here. Okay. And paste here, and I change this part. I'm looking for the number of students with score equals to 0. The same, I'm looking for number of elements equals to 0 in quiz 1. So quiz 1 dot count 0. So it says that there are 19 students with score equals to 0. Okay. Now, another thing that I can do is that give me the index. I will retrieve the index of a student with score equals to 5. Okay, so I know there are 5 students with score equals to 5, and I want to know which, I just want to know one student, the name of, or the initial of these students with score equals to 5. Okay, so what do? I use dot index. Okay, so and if you want to know what is dot index, do list dot index. On help functions, you return the first index of the value that you're looking for. Examples, I'm looking for quiz 1 dot index 5. So tell me which one of which index has value 5. Okay, so it say that 6, index 6 has value 5, and it's actually returned the first index, the smallest index with value 5. Okay, so the following code, okay, returns the first index of value 5 in quiz 1. All right, so I want to know, so we know that the student with index 6 has score of quiz 1, which is with score equals to 5. So I want to know the name of the students or the initial of the students. To get the initial of the students with index 6, which has score of quiz 1 equals to 5. So I will just do class list, and I retrieve the name at index 6, which is Marka. So Marka has score 5. All right. So these are just some examples of what we can do with list. And we're going to do another mini lecture to present the lab for you later on. All right. Before we go to the lab, I discuss or present the lab material. It's something extra that I want to talk about. So remark, right? So students might ask why, or one question that we want to address is that why do we store students' names as initials? Why not just store them as names? Okay, so why is it? if its name is Adam Grant, why don't we just store it as names? For example, a list of names, say Adam Grant, Rosie Park, etc. Then why not just store them as names? Right? Why do we store it as initials? Why do we have our class list store as initials of the names, which I define it this way, which is the first two characters of your first name, followed by the first two characters of your last name. All right. So what is the rationale? Why not just store the name by itself? Why identify students using initial? Okay. So in other words, why identify student by initial? Okay. So one of the reasons that I do that is because different names have different characters, and they tend to be more than just 4 characters. Okay. So if you look at our initials, they define such that they only have 4 characters. So each of the students have 4 characters. So if I store them as names, there will be more than 4 characters. So I want to try to save my space here. Okay, when we talk about programs, we often want to save space. We often want to do efficient computations. Okay, so one of the reasons. Okay, so reason 1. Okay, shortened. Initial shortened the initial has shorter length compared to length of name of a student name. So a student's initial has shorter length compared to the length of a student's name. So we want to save space here. We have a short form of the name. Okay, so reason 2. So notice that I use index to identify the position of the students in the list. Okay, so intuitively, if you're looking for a particular name, say names.index. So if you want to look for the position of Adam Grant in the list, this is how you do it. Okay, so you look for Adam Grant, the index of Adam Grant in the list names. Okay, so intuitively you think of it as behind the scenes, the algorithm is performing searching. It's search for the word Adam Grant in this list here. So imagine we have 87 names here. In our class, we have 87 students. Okay, so it has to match every single characters of the name here to a name in this list of 87 students. So the longer the string, the more operations it takes to match an element inside the list. Okay. In comparison, if I have only 4 characters to search for, which is ADGR, so I only need to match these 4 characters in my class list. Okay, so the more characters that you are looking for, the more operations that you need to perform. So when I restrict the number of characters to 4, I tend to shorten the amount of operations needed to perform dot index. Okay, so intuitively, searching for a string of shorter characters of shorter length is faster than searching for a string of longer length. Okay. So when I search for initials, I only search for 4 characters rather than searching for the original names, which has more than 4 characters. Okay. So performing the method .index is faster on shorter string. All right. So that's the reason. And then as soon as if we want to have a short form of name for faster computation of .index and to save space, why not just use justify initial to be of some length of length 1 to be a string of length 1, okay, or 2 or 3. Why we define the initial to be of length 4. All right, so now think about it. So if I want to define initial to be a string of length 1, for example, I take the student's first name. So for example, so think about, okay, for length 1, for instance, if I define the initial to be the first character of your first name, okay, then of course the initial of each student will be just of length 1. But what could be the complications? Okay, so for example, I have another names here, say Alex Grant. Okay, so my class list, for example, it will be my initials. Suppose I have another students with Alex Grant, and I have students Adam Grant, I have students Rosie Park. And if I identify each of these students by their first letter of their first name, then my initials will be equals to A, and then R, and then A again. So what happened is that there will be students, there are students here with the same initial because they have the same first character of their first name. And so I couldn't uniquely identify students based on their initial. So what are the complications? Is that there could be students with the same initial. This is a very high probability that this occur because the length 1 string can only have A to Z, 26 characters, and we have 87 students. So obviously there will be some students with the same initial. Hence, we couldn't identify each student uniquely using this definition of initial. Okay, so defining a string, initial as just only length 1 is a bad idea because we have 87 students. There will definitely be some students with the same initial if you define it to be, for example, the first characters of your first name. Now, then you're thinking, what about length 2? Okay, for length 2, for instance, so if I define the initial to be the first character of your first name, followed by the first character of your last name, for example. Okay, the same issue occurs. Okay, and I did try it. So based on the names of the students in my class, I tried taking the define initial to be the first character of your first name, followed by the first character of your last name. The same issue occurs. And we call this issue duplication issue, where there are multiple elements in the list with the same elements. Okay, and for length 3, so the same for length 3. Okay, same duplication issue occurs for length 3. So I did try with length 1. I did try with length 1 because I know that we have 87 students. I did not just do length 1. I tried with length 2. Again, it has duplications, and I tried with length 3. It has duplications. So, and the next thing that I tried with length 4, and at this moment, length 4, there is no duplications. Now, So what is the key takeaway is that I actually don't know how many characters are needed for the initials. I actually have to try it with len 2 and len 3, and both of them give me duplications. And then when I try with len 4, it doesn't give me duplications. And that allow me to define initial this way, where I take the first two characters of the first name followed by the first two characters of the last names. Now the questions next is that how do I detect there is duplications or duplicated values in the class list, where class list is a list of initials. Okay, how do I detect the duplicated values? So let's look at our class list here. So this is our class list. It's here. Okay, how do I know there are duplications? Okay, so let's look at this. I'm gonna clean this part first. Okay, so how do I check whether there are duplicate values? Okay, so there are multiple ways to do it. So there are multiple ways to check if there are duplicated values. Okay, and we will only look at one simple way for now. There are other ways to do it. We will briefly go through these other ways, but we will look at it only later on in the class. So for example, how do I identify there are duplicated values? And there are 87 initials here. I can't check one by one. Okay, for example, I want to check whether there is any other students with the initial Liba. Okay, so I'm gonna copy and paste here. So I count the elements, number of elements in class list with the values Liba, and it say 1. That means the only students with the initial Liba is there's only one student with the initial Liba. There will be no other subsequent students with the initial Liba. Now, then I check for the subsequent one, dot count for the subsequent initial subsequent students. Again, it has 1, but I can't do this for 87 students. So I can do it, for example, using a loop where we will learn it later on. Okay, so one way, okay, count each occurrence of initial in class list if the number of occurrence of a particular initial is not 1, is more than 1, then there is duplicate. There is a duplicate, there are duplicated values. And remember, we don't want duplicated values. We want to be able to identify students uniquely using initial. Okay, but this method is tedious. Okay, because we have to go through or 87 initials. Okay, and one way to do it, and we can do so, is tedious, but we can do so, and this can be done using a for loop, which you will study later. Okay, now what are the ways that you can think of? So I mentioned count because we go through count just now. We do count by counting the number of occurrence. What other ways that we can do? Now, another things that we can do is that, just give you a different examples, all right? For example, if I want just a simple example of numbers, if I want to find if there is a duplicated value in the list of number, just some random numbers, right? Okay. for example. Now this clearly has a duplicated values. 11 occur twice in the list. Suppose there are other values in front. And so on. So 11 occur twice in the list here. Now, how do we easily identify it has duplicated values? One thing we can do is to sort the list. Okay. Once you sort the list, every element in the list are arranged in the sorted order from lowest to the highest elements. Okay. So if you can see here, once we sort the list, we can identify the duplicated values easily. So if you go through the list, if the duplicated values will be next to each other. So this is how you can identify the duplicated values by looking if they are consecutive values with the same consecutive same values. Okay, so one thing is that second, we can sort the list. Okay, in the sorted list, if there exist duplicated values, these duplicated values will be next to each other. Then we can easily identify the existence of duplicated values by checking if there are consecutive elements of the same value. Okay, and again, we will learn how to do this later in the course. All right, I just mentioned all of these because these are all the things that you can think of at this moment of how you want to check whether they are duplicated values. Okay, and we will learn how to do that in a later part of the course. Now, the third way of doing it is to use a different data structure. Okay, so for example, we have another data structure called set. Okay. So set is a data structure which is an unordered collections of unique elements. Okay, so set is another data structure. So set. So we have learned list. So list is a data structure that store elements in sequence. Okay, and it can have duplicated values. Okay, or it can store. It can have the same values stored in the list multiple times. Okay, and set, on the other hand, is a data structure that store elements in we call it unordered manner, unordered fashions, without order. Okay, and each element is stored once. Okay, so for example, if I have if I have a set, say S is equals to 1, 2, 1, 3. Okay, so a set is defined using curly braces. Okay, so you type of S. This is a set. All right, at a list. So in Python, a list is defined using square bracket. Okay. And in Python, a set is defined using curly brackets. Okay. So this is how we define a set here. So type of S, capital S here, that we are defined to be a set that contains this element. It has type set. Now, just like this, we can find out the number of elements in this set here using the function length. So length of this set S here is 3 instead of 4, because every element is stored only once. So 1 occurs twice in this set, but it's only stored once. Okay, so if you print S, you will realize that 1, the value 1 here actually only stored once instead of twice, even though you define it to be 2 times. Okay, so that set here would remove all the duplicate values. Okay, it only store unique values. So it will remove any, if the element occur twice, it will only store it once. Okay. Now, how do we use this data structure? Okay, so now, so the third way is to store or create a set of initials. Okay, create a copy of initials as set. Create a copy of class list as set. Okay, so for example here, my class list is this. I can, for example, create a class list set. I use typecasting. Okay, I basically typecast the class list, which was originally defined as a list. I typecast it to set. Okay, so now my class list set is of type set. Okay, now I'm going to find out the length of this class list set, which is 86. And this is equals to the number of, which is equals to the length of class list when it's stored as list. Okay, so when the class list is stored as list, the length is 86. When I store it as a set, it also is 86, which tells me that there is actually no duplicate values. Okay, if the length of class list stored as set is the same as the length of class list stored as list, then there will be no duplicate values. There will be no duplicated values. Duplicate values. Okay, just to give you another example to contrast. For example, if my list L is equals to 1, 2, 1, 3. Okay, the length of L is 4. Okay, now I make it into a set by doing typecasting set of L. And I'm going to check the length of L set. Now, length of the L set is 3, but length of L, which is 4, which tells us that there are duplicated values in L. Okay, because when I typecast it to set, it will remove any values that have occurred already. So 1 occurred already. So in L set, it will only store once, the value 1 once. So if these two lengths is not equal, I know there will be duplicated values. But if these two lengths are equal, for example, I have L equals to 1, 3, 4, 3, and the length is 4. And in my L set, the length is also 4. When I typecast it, okay, then these two match. I know there will be no duplicated values in the list L. So this is how I find out where the, when I try different length of the initials, I find I use these to figure out whether they are duplicated values. Okay, so everything here are extra informations, or everything in the remark are extra informations. So this is for you to read from that. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you.